Hi, this is Ms. Patterson. Today we're going over AP Biology Unit 1, Topic 1. We're going to talk about the structure of water and hydrogen bonding. So let's do a real quick chemistry review. Matter is anything that has mass, takes up space. So that will be something like rocks, bugs, air, etc. Something that has mass. An element is something that cannot be broken down into a simpler substance. So when I look at the periodic table, all those items on the periodic table are an element. I can't break them down into something less that still has mass. There's 92 natural elements. The other ones are synthetic, and they're found on the periodic table. A compound are going to be two or more different elements bonded together, and they're going to be in a fixed ratio. So for example, you have salt, NaCl. Salt will always have one sodium and one chlorine. Water will always have two hydrogens and one oxygen in this fixed compound. If I change this ratio, I change the compound, I'm going to change what that product is. So essential elements for life, there's 92 that occur naturally, and 96% of the living matter is going to contain what I call sponge. So sponge is not a cookie. It is sulfur, phosphorus, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen. So these are all essential whenever they go someplace like to Mars, or they're looking in an area where they think there might be life. They're looking for matter that has these elements in it to some extent, certain ratios, in order to see if there's a possibility of life there. Trace elements, these are going to be 20 to 25%. We also need other ones to survive. So examples for that would be like zinc. We need iron, we need copper. Those are good for blood, for immune system, for living organisms to be able to produce those. So here I have oxygen. This is the atomic number. This tells me how many protons and how many electrons I have in a neutral atom. This is the symbol of my element. The first letter will be capitalized. If it's singular, it's just one capitalized letter. If it's two letters, the first one's always capitalized, the other one's always lowercase. That way they can tell what elements are what whenever they have them in a compound. This is the atomic mass. This is the accumulation of protons and neutrons in the nucleus. An isotope, atoms of the same element that contain different number of neutrons. Remember that our nucleus is going to have protons. So hydrogen just has a proton, it has no neutrons. Here I have deuterium, and this is going to be hydrogen's isotope because I have one proton and one neutron. Here I have tritium. This is going to be hydrogen again, but an isotope, one proton, two neutrons. I can have a carbon isotope. The common form is going to be carbon-12, where I have 12, an atomic mass of 12, which is 6 protons and 6 neutrons. An isotope is carbon-13. I have an added neutron. I have 6 protons because the protons is what makes carbon carbon, but the different number of neutrons is what can change, and that's going to make it into an isotope. Here I have carbon-14. Again, I have 6 protons, but I have 2 extra neutrons, so this is going to be an isotope of carbon. Radioactive isotopes, these are going to be ones that become unstable, and they're going to break down more at a constant rate over time. So examples would be like your carbon-12, carbon-13, carbon-14. These are used to date rocks and fossils. They can be used to treat cancer, kill bacteria. They're also used as tracers. So whenever you have a procedure done, they can go in and you can ingest this, and then they'll put you in an x-ray machine, and then you're able to see kind of like where these metals or where these tracers are left behind. So they can see kind of more what's going on inside. Groups are going to have similar properties, so a group is going to go up and down. They're going to have the same number of valence electrons. Remember, valence electrons are the electrons in that outermost ring of your shell, or like your Bohr model. You have periods. These are going to have the same number of shells or orbits. So a period goes from left to right. A good way to remember this is you write a sentence from left to right and you end with a period. So periods are going to be the rows. So this will be the same number of shells. This will be the same number of orbits. So when I look here, I have sodium. Sodium is in row 3. So sodium has 3 shells. It's in group 1, so it has 1 valence electron. So sodium has 1 valence electron and 3 shells. I look over here at oxygen. Oxygen's in period 2, so it has 2 rings, and 16 up here where it's group 16, if you take away that 1, that 6 is telling you how many valence electrons it is. So it has 6 valence electrons and 2 rings. Your Bohr model is just a quick representation of an atom, just kind of showing your energy levels. You start with a nucleus, and you have your first ring. Your first ring can hold a maximum of 2 electrons. I bring in a second ring. That can hold a maximum of 8. I have a third ring that holds a maximum of 18. On this first ring, I can only add 2. If I have to do more than 2, I have to jump to this second ring. Once this second ring is full of 8, I can't add any more. I have to jump here to the third ring, and I have to fill up this third ring. So once a ring is full, I have to move to the next one. So periods and groups. I look at carbon. So tell me, pause for a second, and tell me how many valence electrons and how many rings does it have. So I have group 14, so that means I have 4 valence electrons. I'm in period 2, so I have 2 rings. So carbon would look like this. I have 2 rings, 1, 2, and then I have 4 valence electrons, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the outer shell. Carbon has 6 total electrons, so I fill the first ring with 2, 1, 2. Remember, I can't fill any more here, so then I have to add it to the second ring. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My last ring has 4, and I have 2 rings altogether. Let's look at magnesium. You can pause. Magnesium is going to be in group 2, so I have 2 valence electrons. I am in period 3, so I have 3 rings. So magnesium will look like this. My first ring is full with 2. My second ring is full with 8, so then I have to go to my third ring, and I add 2 valence electrons. I have helium. Helium's a little different. I'm in group 18. So everything in this column should have 8 valence electrons. But helium's an example that's not really fitting in with that mold. Because how many electrons does helium have? I only have 2. So I don't have 8. But when I fill that first ring is full. So this is kind of like a group that has a full shell. So 8 is considered a full stable shell. So even though I may not have a full 18 with argon in that third shell, I have 8. And so that's going to make it seem full. So for helium, I'm in group 8. I'm in period 1. So I have 1 ring, but my outer ring is full with those 2 electrons. Lewis dot structure is just dots that represent the valence shell. So instead of drawing out a Bohr model, I can just draw the dots for however many valence electrons that it has. So let's look at beryllium. Beryllium is in group 2. So beryllium, you just do the symbol, Be, and 2 dots to show those valence electrons. I look at aluminum. I write the symbol for aluminum, and then I do my dots. I'm in group 13 or group 3. So I only have 3 valence electrons. I look at fluorine. It's in group 17. I drop that 1. I have 7 valence electrons. And then I have krypton. Krypton's in group 8. And so it's going to have a full shell or a stable ring of 8. Octet rule is the rule of 8. Atoms want a full or an empty shell, and 8's going to consider it full. So here I have beryllium. It has 2. It's not happy. It wants 8 or it wants 0. So the question is it easier for beryllium to get rid of 2 or to bring in 6? So for beryllium, it's going to be easier to get rid of 2. Aluminum, I have 3. Is it going to be easier to get rid of 3 or to bring in 5? It's going to be easier to get rid of 3. It's going to take less energy to get rid of 3. I look at fluorine. Fluorine has 7. Is it easier to bring in 1 or to get rid of 7? It's going to be easier to bring in 1. Carbon's a little different. Okay, I have 4. So is it easier for carbon to get rid of 4 or to bring in 4? So for carbon, it's going to use the same amount of energy either way. So carbon can either get rid of 4 or it can bring in 4. So carbon can be plus or minus 4. I have krypton. Krypton already has 8. It does not want anything, and so it's not going to attract elements to it. So the noble gases, that group 8, they're stable. They're very inert. They're unreactive with other elements, so they kind of keep to themselves. Chemical bonds are bonds that are formed between the electrons in the outermost shell. They're valence electrons. Chemistry is, a lot of it is just where are the electrons, who's got them, who wants them, where are they at? So this is kind of talking about the chemical bonds. Oxygen here has 6. So oxygen has 6, it wants 8. So it's going to take one from this hydrogen. It's going to take one from this hydrogen. So it's going to borrow these two to give oxygen 8. And when it gives oxygen that 8, it's going to be stable for a little bit. Hydrogen has 1. It wants a full shell to be like helium. So oxygen will let hydrogen borrow one of its electrons. So this can have 2 electrons for a little bit. This can have 2 electrons for a little bit. And they're going to kind of pass back and forth to make that happen. Ionic bonds are going to steal valence electrons. They're going to be between a metal and a nonmetal. And these create ions, which means that there's a electrical charge, a positive or a negative charge on those atoms. Ionics are going to be a lot stronger than a covalent bond. So let's look at salt. So I have NaCl. And why are these two elements attracted to each other? So these make salt, so these are going to bond together, and the question is, well, why? So I have chlorine, I have 7 electrons, I have sodium that has 1. So is it easier for chlorine to get rid of 7 or to bring in 1? So we want to bring in 1. Is it easier for sodium to bring in 7 or to get rid of 1? So it's easier for sodium to get rid of 1. So what's going to happen is this electron is going to leave and it's going to move over here. So chlorine wants to be more stable, so it's going to take that electron and it's going to be like, hey, can I have one of your electrons? And sodium's going to be like, sure, here you go. Then that electron is going to get pulled over to chlorine. Now chlorine's stable. It's going to have its 8. Sodium here now has an empty outer shell, but technically the second ring in, because sodium's in the 3rd period, so it has 3 rings. So that second ring is full, so it's considered stable. So now sodium's happy. So it's kind of going to be kind of like a stable noble gas. And now they're going to have a charge. So chlorine is going to have a negative charge. Sodium is going to have a positive charge. And those opposites attract, are like magnets. They're going to pull each other together. So now chlorine and sodium are bonded. They're going to make the compound salt. Now we have to write it out. So we write it out by showing the oxidation number or the ionic number. So did chlorine gain or lose electrons? And this is where a lot of people get kind of confused. They don't understand if it's gaining, if it's losing, positive, negative. So the best way to do it is to write it out. So chlorine has 17 protons. That's what makes chlorine chlorine. A stable, neutral chlorine atom is going to have 17 electrons. But here it gained 1 more. So this chlorine no longer has 17 electrons. It now has 18. So is it more positive or is it more negative? It's more negative, and it's more negative by 1. So we write chlorine out as chlorine 1 minus or minus 1. I have sodium. It's going to lose an electron. So since it lost an electron, I have to look at this. So sodium has 11 protons. I have on a neutral atom 11 electrons. I no longer have 11. I got rid of 1, so I have 10. Now my charge is going to be a +1 or a 1 plus. My oxidation number has changed. I write them out. So now I have to write it out as Cl minus 1 and a 1 plus. There are times where it just might be Cl minus and a plus. The 1 is just assumed. Now I have a compound. It's neutral and stable. I have a net zero charge. These charges are going to cancel out. And so I have a charge that is neutral or stable, or we just say a net zero charge. There are different types of ions. You have cations and anions. The positives are called cations, and the best way to remember this, it's silly, but my students remember it, is a cation is positive, and the little pa will make it positive. That's going to be a ion where I have lost electrons. I have more protons than I do electrons. Anions are negative, so if you think of an ant with the little antennas, anion is going to be negative. That means I have more electrons than protons. Covalent bonds are going to share electrons back and forth. Between 2 to 6 electrons can get passed back and forth. They're going to be between 2 nonmetals. They can be 2 of the same or 2 of the different elements. So if I had oxygen gas can be a covalent bond. They're going to pass electrons back and forth to each other. I could have water where I have hydrogen and oxygen, and they can pass electrons back and forth that way too. Electronegativity is the amount of attraction or pull that an atom has towards another type. I like to say that this is the greediness for electrons. How greedy are these atoms for electrons? So here is an electronegativity chart. The closer I get to fluorine, fluorine's the most electronegative. Oxygen, chlorine, nitrogen, these are pretty high electronegative. These are very greedy for electrons. They want all the electrons and they don't want to share. The ones that are lower, these are going to be ones that really could care less. They really don't want them. They'll let these other ones that are stronger take the electrons for more time. So we call it greedy for electrons. That's the best way to think about it. I have polar and nonpolar bonds. So polar are going to share unevenly. So water is a polar bond. This is going to be oxygen, super electronegative. Hydrogen, not so much. When the electrons are getting pulled, oxygen is going to hold those electrons for a longer period of time. It's going to rarely let hydrogen have it. Hydrogen will have the electron just for a little bit. It's going to pull it right back to it. And it's going to let hydrogen, and then it's going to pull it right. It's going to spend most of its time here around oxygen. It's kind of like a kid that has their favorite toy and somebody wants to play with it. You'll let that other kid play with it, but then that one boy is going to want that toy right back. He's not going to want to have other people play with his toys. And that's kind of how really high electronegative atoms are, like oxygen and fluorine. So when oxygen has all those electrons, it's going to have a very negative electronegative charge. So this symbol right here means electronegative. When the electrons are here, this will be negative. When hydrogen has the electrons, then it will be positive. So these poles will switch. Right now, this should be negative. I don't know why that's positive. This should be negative, and this is positive. When hydrogen gets the electrons, this will be positive, this will be negative, and the poles will switch kind of back and forth. Nonpolar covalents, they're just going to be shared evenly. So carbon will have it, hydrogen have it, and it will just kind of be going back and forth like so. Here I have oxygen. They're both super electronegative, but their charge is the same. So the charge is just going to keep going back and forth, back and forth. But with water, it's going to stay here for a long time, barely come here, and then it's going to come right back to the oxygen. I have nonpolar covalent bonds, so let's look at oxygen. I have a charge of 3.5. So this oxygen has a charge of 3.5. This one has a charge of 3.5. They're equal in charge, so the electrons will get passed back and forth evenly. If I had oxygen and selenium, oxygen's going to hold the electrons more because you can see I have a big difference in my electronegative charge. So oxygen is going to pull and keep them around oxygen more than allowing it to leave. You can have a double bond with this. So oxygen here, I have 6 valence electrons. I have 6 valence electrons. This oxygen needs 2 more. So this will borrow 2 electrons from here to go to this oxygen. So for a little bit, this oxygen will have 8. This one here will have less. And then this one will come over here, it will borrow 2. This will have 8 for a little bit, and then 8 for a little bit. So it has to borrow 2 from this oxygen, and then 2 from that. So we show it by these lines. These lines represent electrons that are getting passed back and forth. Polar covalent bonds are shared unevenly, so water is the example. I look here, I have hydrogen, which is 2.1. I have oxygen, which is 3.5. So oxygen has the higher electronegative pull than hydrogen. So the electrons are going to stay around oxygen longer than around hydrogen. Here's my electronegative symbol. This is showing that oxygen will stay more negative longer. My hydrogens will have a positive electronegative charge. When I'm doing covalence, same thing. Fluorine needs 1. This fluorine needs 1, so it's going to borrow 1, go back and forth. They're the same charge, even though these are highly electronegative. They have the same charge, so they'll be passed back evenly back and forth. Hydrogen, again, is polar, and so it's going to get pulled to the oxygen. When you see water molecules, we're going to talk about hydrogen bonds, and this is super important to understand. When we have a covalent bond, the covalent bond here is passing electrons back and forth. When I have a hydrogen bond, these oxygens are so greedy for electrons that they already have everything they need. They have 8 electrons filling this shell. Their shell is full. They can't add any more to it. But they're so greedy they want more. They are trying to pull the electrons off these hydrogens, but they can't. So these are kind of like what I like to think of as magnets. These are going to be attracted, this negative charge is going to be attracted to this positive hydrogen, and it's going to be pulled in those directions. Nothing gets passed back and forth. No electrons get passed back and forth. Only through the covalent bonds do the electrons get passed back and forth. So this is more like a magnet. This is going to be attracted. These hydrogen bonds break super easy. So if I'm working with something, water will move. These hydrogen bonds will break because they're more like magnets than they are with the electrons being passed back and forth. Here I have a water molecule. And a water molecule can form 4 hydrogen bonds. This oxygen is super electronegative. It's wanting these hydrogens, so it's going to be pulling hydrogens to it. Nothing's going to pass, but it's going to be pulled like a magnet. This oxygen over here is going to get pulled to this hydrogen. This oxygen is going to get pulled to this hydrogen. And one water molecule can pull 4 other water molecules towards it with these hydrogen bonds. The hydrogen bonds with fluids like water, you can take them and they'll break. I can run my finger through water on a table and the water will break apart and then come back together. So these hydrogen bonds are always kind of like moving and fluxing and going in all these different directions. When I get into a solid, the hydrogen bonds are more fixed. I just can't take an ice cube and bend it and break those bonds apart. But with water, it's more fluid. That's why it's a fluid. When I have a gas, they're more spread out. They're not going to be attracted to each other until they start condensation. They start coming back together into a liquid. There's special properties of water. Water does a lot of amazing things. So you have cohesion, is the attraction of molecules to the same substance. So water will attract to water. When you are driving down the road and you have water on your windshield, the water will come together and it will create these bigger beads, and sometimes you'll have like water droplet races and they'll race down your windshield and then they hit another one and they get bigger. So water is attracted to water. So they will make these bigger beads because of that hydrogen bonds that can be created. This is going to allow for transport of water and nutrients against gravity. The water will cohere to itself. Water is going to attach, and then as it does, it kind of makes a chain as it goes up the plant, so it can go up against gravity. So big, huge trees, they need water at the very, very tip. Cohesion, adhesion, capillary action, all that helps to pull it up. Cohesion also causes surface tension. When you see insects that are sitting on top of water, what they're doing is the water on top, this layer is attached to each other through hydrogen bonds. The insect, the leaf, is able to push down on that, and it doesn't break those hydrogen bonds. It kind of keeps it going. If you have a bead of water, if you've ever done the penny lab where you've dropped drops of water on a penny to see how many it can go, it will start to bow. And as it bows, it's going to have the hydrogen bonds are pulling on each other until that surface tension breaks. You have adhesion. This is going to be the attraction of molecules to different substances. So it's water attaching to something else. So you have water attaching to the xylem or the phloem, which are kind of like the arteries of trees that will allow items to be funneled up. It will attach to that. If you go outside and you see a leaf, there's water on the leaf. The water is adhering to the leaf. So adhesion is water or something attaching to another substance. Another property of water is capillary action. This describes how water moves up like a narrow tube, or if you've put out paper towels and the water has slowly kind of creeped into the paper towel. This is a capillary action. It's going to move up against gravity. It's going to happen when adhesion is greater than cohesion. So the attraction of water to something else is going to be greater. Another one is heat capacity. It's the amount of heat energy needed to raise the temperature of a substance. Water has a very high heat capacity. If I go home tonight and I decide to make a pot of spaghetti, I'm going to put the pot of water on the stove, and as soon as I turn on the stove, it's not going to instantly start to boil. It's going to take a little bit of time. And then same thing, once it boils, it's going to take a little bit of time for it to cool off. The heat to absorb has to break those hydrogen bonds, but the heat is released also from those hydrogen bonds when they form. It's all of this, it takes a little bit of time. It just doesn't happen instantaneously. Another property is when you have large bodies of water, it takes a long time for a big body of water to heat up, but it also takes a lot of time for it to cool off. So if I have a small pond, the pond is going to heat up faster and cool off faster than a lake. And a lake is going to heat up and cool down faster than an ocean. When you have maritime effect, you've got places that are near the ocean where the temperature stays pretty constant. And it's the body of water. It's going to release heat at night. It's going to absorb heat during the day. It keeps temperature more consistent. Evaporative cooling. This is going to be pulling heat energy off of someone or an organism if they're sweating or if they get wet. It's going to help pull that energy out. This is going to prevent leaves from getting too warm in the sun. It's going to help stabilize the Earth's climate. It's all of these types of properties, the cooling effect of it. If you ever get really super hot, you're going to start to sweat, and you're going to feel cooler once you sweat. If you really want to cool off fast, you jump into a lake or you spray yourself down with a hose, and that's going to cool you off even faster. So that water is pulling that heat energy out. Density. As water solidifies, it expands and it floats. It becomes less dense. The hydrogen bonds spread out and they start to crystallize, and the size of it expands. If you've ever put a Coke can in the freezer and forgot about it, and you come back and your can is busted open, and it's because the water had turned to ice and it's expanded out. It's one of the very few things that does that. Most stuff shrinks when it gets cold, but water actually gets bigger. But that's what we need, because as water freezes, it floats and it goes to the top. If this didn't happen, this would sink to the bottom, and then it would freeze again and sink to the bottom, and freeze again and sink to the bottom, and then this would be frozen from the bottom up. And then everything living in here would die because it would be frozen to death. This is hard to break the bonds for ice. It's a solid, so again, you just can't twist it and just break it. This is going to allow fish, aquatic organisms to survive in water. It helps to insulate. It doesn't allow water to get cold so fast. It does a lot of stuff. So here I have liquid water. You can see all my water molecules are all kind of going around all over the place. These hydrogen bonds are going to break and reform multiple times. Solid ice, my hydrogen bonds are pretty much fixed. They're going to stay that way till it starts to warm up. And as it warms up, the water molecules on the end are going to start to get excited. They're going to start to vibrate. And as they vibrate, they're going to start breaking these bonds. And then it's going to start to melt and turn to water. This is an example of what happens whenever you put a liquid in a freezer and it bursts. All of this is going to expand out, break the can. Another property of water is it's a universal solvent. The polarity of water is going to allow it to get in between other molecules and start to pull it apart. So I can have something like salt, and water will get in there and it will wrap around chlorine atoms, it will wrap around sodium atoms, and it's going to start to pull stuff apart and allow it to dissolve. It will do this with sugar. It will go in and it will start to pull electrons out and start breaking things down. If you go home and you bake cookies and you burn cookies on your cookie sheet, you just don't throw it away. You're going to take it and you're going to soak it in water. And when you soak it in water, the water's going in, it's going to start breaking down those bonds, and you're going to be able to scrape it off and clean it. Water makes canyons, it breaks down rocks. Water is really good at tearing stuff apart. There's a difference between a solvent, a solute, and a solution. So this is a little story that I tell my students. One day I'm at home and I'm sitting at my kitchen table and I have a salt shaker. And my mom gets really mad if I spill salt. She doesn't want me to waste it. And one day I'm messing around and I knock salt all over the table. I have to hide it. And she knows I'm sneaky, I just can't throw it in the trash. So I have to get rid of it. Where can I get rid of it? I happen to have a glass of water. So I put the salt in the water. The water's going to dissolve it. She's not going to be able to see the salt in the water. So now I've solved my problem. So the solvent in solution, the solute is, what are you trying to hide? So I'm trying to hide the salt. The salt is my solute. That is what's going to be dissolved. What solved my problem? The water. The water is my solvent. This is what's going to take in the solute. Both of these together are the solution to my problem. So I have, what are you hiding? The salt. what solved my problem, the water, and the solution is both of these together. So the salt water is my solution, the salt inside that's being hidden is my solute, what is hiding it is my solvent. Like likes like, so like dissolves like doesn't dissolve what's not liked. Alright, so that means that if I have something that is polar, it's going to dissolve polar. So sugar's polar, I'll be able to dissolve it in a solution. Oil does not dissolve in water. Oil is not polar. Oil is non-polar. So they're not going to dissolve together. So things that are polar will dissolve polar. Things that are non-polar will dissolve non-polar. Alright, it's a big unit. Alright, so that's AP Bio 1, Topic 1, Structure of Water and Hydrogen Bonding. I hope that was helpful. If it was, let me know. If you liked, subscribe. We'll see you guys later.